Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable resilience of medieval peasants, ordinary men and women whose lives were stitched together from hunger, backbreaking labor, and the constant shadow of death. They endured plagues, wars, crushing taxes, and famine, sometimes all before the week was over. And yet, despite living in conditions that would make even the hardiest modern soul wince, they kept going day after day, generation after generation, forming the backbone of medieval Europe while barely keeping their heads above mud. Before we get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, drifting off to the thought of peasants hauling grain and dodging lice in the cold dawn. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture waking up in a medieval hovel. Not a charming cottage or a rustic inn with linen sheets. Your bed is a mound of straw, flattened from years of use, punctuated with flecks of dust, insects, and perhaps the occasional small rodent. The floor beneath you is pure dirt, uneven and damp from yesterday's rain. You share this space with your family, and often a few livestock, because in this era, warmth and protection trumped privacy. Goats, chickens, pigs, all roommates, all odor contributors. The air is thick with smoke from last night's fire, which you lit for warmth and for cooking the meager pottage that is your breakfast. The smoke clings to everything: walls, ceiling, hair, and lungs. Your stomach growls, but you eat what you have: a crust of coarse bread, maybe some leftover pottage, weak ale if you're lucky. Salt is precious. Meat is rarer still. Breakfast isn't a pleasure, it's a survival calculation. Outside, the world is cold and muddy. Your neighbors' huts lean like dominoes, smoke drifting from every chimney, or rather, every hole in the roof. The rooster, ever the alarm clock, doesn't care about your aches or your dreams. He announces the day with unrelenting punctuality. And you know what awaits you beyond the door: fields that stretch endlessly, tools that demand more strength than you have, soil that refuses to cooperate, and a lord whose dues are heavier than your own back. Hygiene is a laughable concept. Bathing is rare, water is dangerous, lice and fleas are constant companions. You dress in the same scratchy tunic you slept in, patched repeatedly because fabric is scarce. You will smell like smoke, manure, and human sweat. And yet, somehow, despite all this discomfort, you rise, you eat, you trudge to the field, and you endure. Because this is life as a medieval peasant, relentless, monotonous, grim, yet quietly heroic. They fed empires, they tilled the land, and they carried the burdens of society while receiving the smallest fraction of its rewards. Tonight, we'll follow a day in their shoes, waking in a hovel, laboring in the fields, facing taxes, superstition, disease, and the rare sparks of joy that made the suffering bearable. So settle in, breathe slowly, let your mind wander back 1,000 years, and imagine yourself stepping into the shoes of those who survived mud, cold, hunger, and tyranny. This is the monotonous, gritty, surprisingly resilient life of the medieval peasant. You step out of your hovel into the damp morning air, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sunrise. It's mud. Thick, clinging, unrelenting mud that has a way of slipping into your shoes, or more likely your bare feet, and refusing to leave. Welcome to the fields. The place where peasants earn their keep, one aching back at a time, while the lords above sip wine in stone castles, completely oblivious to how much your spine is groaning. Your tools are humble. The plow, called an ard, is a primitive affair compared to the gleaming modern tractors your mind might imagine. It's a wooden frame with a metal tip, dragged by oxen that are far too stubborn or far too slow, or both. You grip the handles, feeling the rough wood cut into your palms, and try not to swear, because that won't make the ox pull faster, and it certainly won't make your lord happier. Today, you're assigned to plowing. Tomorrow, maybe sowing. Maybe harvesting. The work is repetitive. You bend, you dig, you push, you pull. The soil resists. Rocks rise like cruel little obstacles. Roots tangle your blade. Your back protests. Your knees scream. Your arms feel like they belong to someone else. And yet, you keep going. Because if you don't plow, sow, and harvest, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you won't survive to plow another day. It's a vicious, endless cycle of motion, sweat, and grim determination. The weather is your constant companion, and not a friendly one. Rain turns the fields into a mudslide, slipping beneath your boots, soaking through your tunic, and turning ox dung into a particularly pungent exfoliant. Sun beats down mercilessly in summer, baking your back, drying your lips, and turning the field into an oven. Wind whips dust into your eyes, and cold gnaws at your fingers in winter, making each stroke of the plow feel like punishment from some invisible, judgmental deity. You plow, you sweat, you curse, you pray, you repeat. If you're lucky, you get to plant seeds in a field prepared for crop rotation. The three-field system is an improvement over previous chaos, but it doesn't exactly feel like innovation when your arms are on fire from digging and your legs ache from standing in clumps of wet clay. One field grows wheat. One field grows barley or legumes. One field lies fallow. You follow the cycle as dutifully as you follow the orders of your Lord, and yet it never ends. Fields, tools, seeds, back pain, hunger, repeat. Every season, the same rhythm, only the weather and the soil change, just to keep things interesting. Serfdom is your reality. You are legally bound to the land, tied to the manor by custom and law. You cannot just walk away to find easier labor. The Lord owns the land, and in effect, owns your labor. Your day's toil isn't just for your family, it's a part of your Lord's wealth. Your sweat irrigates his power. Your harvest fills his granaries. Occasionally, he might be generous enough to let you keep a portion for your own survival. Occasionally. Most days, it feels like the universe has organized itself to remind you that nobody cares about the aches in your back except maybe your fellow peasants, who are also groaning in rhythm beside you. And the monotony, oh, the monotony. Imagine standing in a field, gripping a tool, bending over the same plot of soil, watching the same sky, hearing the same birds, feeling the same mud underfoot, day after day, season after season. There is no variety beyond the weather, and even that is cruelly capricious. You lift a clump of dirt, pull out a stubborn root, and wipe sweat from your brow, only to realize you've done exactly the same thing yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that for the last 10 years. Breaks are brief, and mostly for drinking water or nibbling stale bread. You sit on the edge of the field, wiping mud from your hands, while children run past fetching buckets of water or chasing chickens out of the wheat. Someone is always hungry, someone is always tired, someone is always complaining. Gossip carries across the fields faster than birdsong. Did you see the bailiff yesterday? One whispers. Didn't your neighbor's goat eat the Lord's cabbage? Says another. And in the middle of this monotony, life continues. Fields are planted, weeds pulled, seeds scattered. Survival is the reward. Harvest season is even more relentless. Sickles slash through stalks of barley. Families and neighbors form temporary teams, bending and cutting under a sun that feels like a hammer on your back. Grain is bundled, carried, and stored. You might steal a kernel or two for your own pot, but rarely more than that. There is satisfaction in a job well done, but it is fleeting, overshadowed by the knowledge that next season begins immediately and the soil is never kind. And yet, work is not entirely unpleasant. There's rhythm in it. The steady pace of bending, cutting, lifting, the muted hum of voices across the fields, the occasional laughter of children, small mercies in a world designed to wear you down. Peasants exchange tips on planting and weeding. Neighbors warn each other of bad weather or pests. You form tiny communities in the field, bound by mutual suffering and a shared understanding. If one person falters, the harvest fails. It is grueling, repetitive, and still, somehow, human. Tools are crude but indispensable. A wooden plow, a worn sickle, a spade made from split timber, a woven basket for carrying grain. Nothing fancy. Nothing ergonomic. You grip, dig, lift, drop, repeat. Every tool leaves blisters, calluses, splinters. Every tool is a reminder that survival is hard, and it has always been hard. And the oxen? They have personalities of their own. Stubborn, slow, hungry, lazy, or sometimes cooperative, if you happen to have an easy day. Your success is often measured by their mood more than your own effort. Weather disasters make you question your life choices. A sudden storm can wash away a week of sowing. Drought can shrivel your hopes of a decent harvest. Floods turn fertile fields into ponds, swallowing months of backbreaking labor. And the Lord? He will still expect his dues, regardless of the weather, because in feudal Europe, you didn't work to survive, you worked to keep the system running. But let's be honest, there is a rhythm to the misery. You plow, you sow, you weed, you harvest. The sun rises. The sun sets. Mud, sweat, aching muscles, repetitive tasks. This is your world. You measure time not by clocks but by the height of the wheat, the rotation of the crops, the passage of seasons. You measure life by endurance, by survival, by whether your children can help in the fields without collapsing from exhaustion. And while the work is monotonous, it shapes you. It teaches endurance. It teaches community. It teaches that in a world without luxury, without comfort, without guarantees, survival itself is the small triumph that keeps you going. When the sun sets and you finally leave the fields, shoulders stiff, hands blistered, feet muddy and cracked, you return to your hovel knowing that tomorrow it begins again. And the next day. And the next. Peasant life in the fields is relentless, backbreaking, monotonous, sometimes absurdly cruel. And yet, it is the engine of medieval Europe. Without it, the castles are empty, the nobles are starving, the church is hollow. It is repetitive, it is grueling, it is sometimes horrifying, but it is also the quiet, stubborn heartbeat of a civilization. So, as you imagine yourself dragging a plow through mud, bending under the sun, listening to the whispers of your neighbors and the calls of your children, remember this. The medieval peasant's life is one of toil, yes, but also one of endurance, of community, and of survival against overwhelming odds. You plow, you sweat, you curse, you laugh, you pray, you repeat, and through it all, life continues. By mid-morning, your stomach is speaking to you in ways more articulate than your neighbors. Hunger is constant, a dull, gnawing companion that never really leaves, even when you're full, because full is a relative term when your meals consist of gruel, bread, and the occasional vegetable scraped from the field. You are a medieval peasant, and your culinary universe is vast in its monotony. Breakfast, if we can call it that, was likely pottage, that gray, simmering concoction of water, grains, legumes, and whatever vegetables were in season. The word pottage sounds quaint, even charming, but in reality it is 90% water, 10% mystery, and a trace of the hope that you might survive another day. Sometimes, meat made an appearance, but only on the rarest of occasions. A pig might be slaughtered, a chicken plucked, but these were luxuries to be rationed, and often hoarded by the lord or church before anyone else got a taste. Bread is a constant presence in peasant life. Black, coarse, baked from rye or barley, filled with husks and grit, it is both sustenance and punishment. You gnaw at a crust, and if you are lucky, it's soft enough not to chip a tooth. Salt is precious and rarely abundant. It transforms your simple loaf from mere calories into a fragile moment of culinary delight. Without salt, everything tastes like sadness. With salt, it tastes like slightly less sadness. Hunger dictates your day. You work in the fields, and your muscles scream for nourishment. You know that the work you do is physically demanding, yet your meals barely provide enough energy to lift a hoe or bend to pull weeds. Children suffer the most. Tiny bodies, growing and burning calories faster than adults, must contend with the same coarse bread and watery pottage. You may catch them sneaking berries from the hedgerow or nibbling roots dug from the soil, small rebellions against the monotony of starvation. Seasonal scarcity is another cruel companion. A failed harvest can mean weeks of near starvation. In winter, stores run low. The pottage thins. The bread gets harder. People forage for whatever they can find: acorns, roots, leaves, mushrooms, sometimes even the bark of trees. It sounds like desperation because it is. Every bite of survival matters. Every mouthful is a silent prayer. Meat is essentially a legend. Perhaps a tale told by the village elder about that one time when the Lord's pig got slaughtered and everyone got a sliver. Fish is similarly rare, unless you live near a river, and even then, it is usually salted, smoked, or preserved in ways that make it less appetizing than pottage. Dairy products, cheese, milk, butter, are mainly reserved for the more fortunate. Sometimes you have cheese so hard it doubles as a tool to smash stubborn bread. At least you get calcium that way. And let's not forget ale. Water is dangerous. You've been warned countless times not to drink from wells or streams without boiling it first. The plague and other illnesses make clean water a rare commodity. Ale is the safer option. Weak, watery ale, sometimes called small beer, is drunk all day long. It provides calories and hydration, and the slightly intoxicating effect helps make the monotony of hunger more tolerable. You're never drunk, but you are never fully sober either. A perfect medieval coping mechanism. Cooking itself is a performance of patience and endurance. Open fires are smoky, and hotter than they should be. Pots are heavy, utensils crude. The smoke makes your eyes water, the ash sneaks into every corner of your humble kitchen, and somehow, you manage to transform scraps of grain and vegetables into a meal that fills bellies, mostly just enough to prevent collapse in the field. The smells are constant. Pottage simmering, bread baking, smoke, animal odors, and sometimes the faint hint of your neighbor's hovel wafting through the wind. It is not pleasant, but it is life. Hunger is also political. The Lord expects his dues. Church expects tithes. That portion of your crops is gone before you can even taste it. Perhaps a tenth, perhaps more, depending on their mood and the season. Your stomach groans in silent protest as your carefully gathered harvest is carted away. Sometimes you might sneak a kernel of grain or a scrap of bread. Sometimes you get caught. Punishments vary: fines, labor, or public shame. Eating secretly is a small thrill, a minor rebellion against a system designed to keep you hungry. Despite the monotony, there are moments of creativity, fleeting though they may be. A well-made stew with multiple vegetables is a small victory. Herbs for flavor, if you can find them. Wild garlic or onions tucked into a pottage can feel like a medieval Michelin star. Berries picked from the hedgerow, carefully washed, or not, bring fleeting sweetness to the tongue. Ale sipped at the end of a long day is a reward, a small comfort that reminds you that even in endless toil, moments of pleasure exist. Foraging is another crucial survival skill. Knowing which roots are edible, which mushrooms are safe, how to gather acorns without poison, or which wild greens make your pottage slightly less watery, that knowledge can mean the difference between strength and collapse. And it's often learned by watching elders, trial and error, and a few unpleasant stomachaches along the way. Survival is a slow teacher, and hunger is its strictest exam. In lean years, starvation becomes public. Villages witness the thin and the frail struggling to survive. It's a communal problem, one that binds peasants together in silent understanding. Everyone is suffering, and the suffering is universal. Mutual aid emerges naturally. Sharing scraps, pooling what little food exists, or foraging together, these are small acts of solidarity that make life just slightly more bearable. And yet, even in the face of hunger, peasants continue to work. Fields must be plowed, seeds sown, weeds pulled, harvests collected. Life cannot pause simply because the stomach protests. Hunger sharpens the senses, makes every meal a triumph, and instills an understanding of scarcity that modern palates would struggle to comprehend. So, when you imagine a day in the life of a medieval peasant, picture the relentless gnaw of hunger. Pottage, bread, a sliver of meat, perhaps a sip of ale. Meals are measured not by pleasure but by necessity, creativity is constrained by scarcity, and survival is always at the forefront of the mind. You eat, you work, you forage, you pray, and you repeat. Every bite is hard-earned. Every swallow a small victory against a system designed to take more than it gives. Medieval peasants were not gourmet chefs. They were survivors, and their meals reflected that reality. The monotony of food mirrored the monotony of life, predictable, repetitive, often grim, but occasionally punctuated by small, fleeting joys. Perhaps a berry found in the hedgerow, perhaps a neighbor sharing a scrap of bread, perhaps a rare piece of meat at harvest time. And with every mouthful, they endured, knowing that tomorrow the hunger would return, and they would face it again with the same stubborn resilience. By midday, your hands are coated in soil, your feet caked in mud, and your hair is a small ecosystem of its own. Welcome to medieval hygiene, a topic that, if you're squeamish, might make you squirm, but don't worry, we're here for history, not medical advice. First, let's address the obvious. Bathing was rare. We're talking once a month if you were lucky, maybe once a season if you were very lucky, and sometimes only when a lord or priest deemed it necessary. Wooden tubs were scarce. Rivers were available, but remember, the water might be carrying disease or at least some mysterious floating debris. A bath could involve dunking your body in a cold, muddy stream, the kind of icy shock that leaves your teeth chattering and your fleas mildly disappointed. Inside the hovel, it was worse. Smoke from the fire clung to your skin, your hair, and the walls. You smelled like a cocktail of manure, sweat, smoke, and yesterday's pottage. Your perfume was eau de manure, and it lingered. There was no shampoo, no conditioner, and no TikTok-inspired skincare routine to save you. Instead, you might use a crude comb or a lice comb if you were lucky, or just your fingers, picking at the tiny invaders crawling through your hair. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, all were faithful companions. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't leave. They were part of your social network. Some peasants experimented with herbal rinses. Chamomile, rosemary, or sage might be boiled in water, strained, and poured over the hair in a half-hearted attempt at cleanliness. It smelled better than mud, sure, but it didn't remove the layers of smoke, sweat, and lingering animal odors. And since water was precious and dangerous, you didn't overdo it. Hygiene was a balancing act between survival and discomfort. Bathhouses, once common in towns during the earlier medieval period, had largely disappeared by the 14th century, especially after the plague. There were rumors, some historians think exaggerated, linking public bathing to disease. So instead of communal tubs, people stuck to brief washes with cold water, rubbing their skin with cloths, and hoping for the best. And when someone did try to wash, it was a delicate dance of modesty, practicality, and avoiding arguments over who owned the bucket. Your hands, perpetually coated in soil and pottage, were a particular problem. You'd scratch an itch and discover a small colony of grime under your nails. Your nails themselves were brittle, broken, and filled with dirt. Soap existed, but it was rare, expensive, and usually made from animal fat mixed with ashes. A primitive scrub that could irritate skin worse than it cleaned it. Most peasants avoided soap unless they had a special occasion or were threatened with disease. Feet were the most abused body parts. Caked in mud, battered by primitive shoes, scratched by rocks and rough surfaces, they were prone to infections like trench foot or fungal growths. Walking barefoot was common, especially for children. Shoes were rare and expensive, leather boots for working the fields practically non-existent. Your toes hardened, your heels cracked, and every step reminded you that comfort was a luxury you could not afford. Clothing hygiene was also a low priority. Tunics and leggings were rarely washed. Fabrics were expensive. They were patched, layered, and reworn until the fibers literally fell apart. Sweating in the summer, freezing in the winter, your garments absorbed every scent: smoke, sweat, mud, and the unmistakable aroma of your livestock roommates. Fashion was never a concern. Survival, warmth, and modesty were your wardrobe requirements. Even the church weighed in on hygiene, but not in a helpful way. Preachers would sometimes warn against vanity or temptation linked to washing, emphasizing spiritual cleanliness over bodily cleanliness. You could spend years scrubbing your body and still hear that sermon reminding you to focus on sin, not grime. Public baths were demonized as hotbeds of lust and disease, so prudence meant staying dirty and alive rather than clean and scandalous. Superstition added another layer to hygiene practices. Boiling water could remove evil spirits, but also might be considered unnecessary labor. Herbs could protect against sickness if hung in the home, but rarely improved your smell. Plague-era advice was sometimes inventive. Smelling strong herbs, carrying flowers, or even wearing pungent pomanders were thought to keep you healthy. In reality, it mostly kept neighbors at arm's length. Children fared no better. Mud, lice, fleas, smoke, and pottage all conspired against them. Baths were rare, combing was irregular, and clothing was handed down from older siblings or neighbors. Hygiene lessons were learned from observation or trial and error. And since water was valuable and heating it was laborious, a proper bath was a major undertaking rather than a daily ritual. And yet, for all the discomfort and the grim humor of it, peasants survived. Fleas didn't kill you, smoke didn't kill you, mud didn't kill you. Survival was messy, slow, and filled with compromises. You lived in a world where comfort and cleanliness were luxuries, where dirt was part of life, and where the resilience to endure filth was part of the daily skill set. So when you imagine medieval hygiene, picture this. You're standing in a smoky, dimly lit hovel, your hair full of lice, your skin streaked with mud, smoke, and sweat. Your feet ache, your nails are filthy, your clothes stink, and your only relief is the occasional herbal rinse or a splash of cold water. You smell bad, everyone smells bad, and that's perfectly normal. You rinse, you comb, you scratch, you laugh at the absurdity, and you repeat. Hygiene was not just a personal matter. It was social, spiritual, and occasionally humorous. A neighbor who looked slightly cleaner than you might be a subject of envy. A bath, when it happened, was an event, a tiny celebration of life and cleanliness in a world designed to keep you dirty. And somehow, through smoke, mud, lice, and superstition, people endured. They laughed, they survived, they passed on what little advice they could about staying clean, or at least tolerably less filthy. In short, medieval hygiene was a mix of necessity, superstition, improvisation, and grim humor. You didn't smell good. You didn't feel comfortable. But you survived. And in that survival, there was a quiet pride, a subtle triumph over a world that offered little indulgence. You washed when you could, combed when you remembered, and endured the rest with stoic patience. Dirt, sweat, smoke, and fleas were constants, companions on the daily journey of medieval life. By midday, or maybe it's midweek or midlife, you begin to understand that no matter how hard you work in the fields, how many seeds you plant, or how carefully you stretch that crust of bread, some of it will inevitably be claimed by someone else. Welcome to medieval taxation, the ancient art of giving everything you have to someone who already has everything. Your lord, that medieval influencer with a sword, decides how much of your harvest, your labor, and sometimes even your soul he wants for himself. The feudal system is simple in theory and nightmarishly complex in practice. You work the land, yes, but the land isn't really yours. You are a villain, a serf, or perhaps a free peasant. Titles that sound nice but mostly dictate the percentage of your sweat that ends up in someone else's granary. You owe your lord rent, usually paid in crops or labor. This is called feudal dues. Sometimes it's a set portion of your wheat. Sometimes it's work on his lands, called corvée labor, that eats up entire days or weeks. You plow, you reap, you thresh, and a portion vanishes, sent straight to the Lord's storehouse. Then there are tithes. The church, as if the Lord's demands weren't enough, wants a tenth of everything you produce. A tenth of wheat, a tenth of eggs, a tenth of your cow if you have one. Miss a tithe? The priests will remind you in sermons, in public shaming, or with a subtle nod toward damnation. The church is efficient like that. Your spiritual terror is tax-deductible, and non-compliance comes with eternal consequences. Mispaying your human lord, and your crops or tools may vanish. Mispaying your divine overlord, and your soul may vanish. Either way, life is tightly budgeted. Imagine your harvest, 20 bushels of wheat. Your lord takes 5. The church takes 2. Your family eats 5. That leaves 8 for emergencies, seed, or the random feast if you're lucky. And remember, there's always a special tax if your lord wants a new horse, a wedding feast, or a castle tower that really doesn't need another turret. Your labor, your sweat, and your life have been diverted into financing someone else's vanity project. Medieval GoFundMe, but you don't get the perks. Dodging taxes is an art form in itself. Some peasants hide grains, bury small stores of food, or trade secretly with neighbors. Risky? Absolutely. Punishment for evasion is swift and brutal. Fines, extra labor, or corporal punishment. Still, when hunger is gnawing, the risk seems worth it. Survival demands creativity, and medieval peasants were experts in the subtle art of keeping just enough for themselves. Occasionally, there are rebellions. The 1381 Peasants' Revolt in England is a famous example. Peasants armed with pitchforks, anger, and a desire to keep some portion of their own harvest stood up to the system. For a brief, glorious moment, it felt like they could rewrite the rules. Then, of course, the rebellion was crushed, leaders executed, and peasants returned to plowing fields they didn't own, paying taxes they could barely afford. But for a fleeting day, or week, they tasted the thrill of resistance. Your Lord is ever present, even when invisible. He might stroll through the village, inspecting the fields, checking your labor, and ensuring your compliance. His officials, the bailiffs, are far less friendly. They show up unexpectedly, assessing dues, counting livestock, and occasionally demanding additional contributions because, well, why not? They wield power with a casual cruelty that would make a modern tax auditor seem like a saint. Your complaints are ignored. Your protests are futile. Your suffering? Well, it's the sound of civilization running smoothly, or at least, smoothly for the top 1%. Corvée labor is particularly grueling. You might be summoned to repair roads, fortifications, or a nearby mill. Your family might be called to help as well. There are no overtime paychecks, no lunch breaks, no thank you cards. You plow and haul, lift and dig, until the sun sets or the overseer deems the work sufficient. And then, because efficiency is sacred, you return home to your own fields and begin again. There is no separation between personal labor and feudal labor. All effort ultimately feeds someone else's wealth. And yet, there is structure. You know when your labor is due, how much you owe, and to whom. There is a rhythm to the oppression, predictable in its demands, relentless in its consistency. Villagers whisper about ways to survive. If he's inspecting the grain, hide a few in the loft. If the tithe collector comes, make sure the chickens are in the barn. Survival requires ingenuity as much as muscle. Your day isn't just work, it's strategy, timing, and quiet negotiation with a system that would rather see you starve than prosper. Taxes and dues also extend to celebrations. Weddings, festivals, and religious events often come with additional burdens. Your lord is hosting a feast for a visiting noble? Will need vegetables, meat, and beer from you, thank you very much. You supply the ingredients, labor to prepare them, and often even decorations, while watching from a distance as the banquet is consumed by people who didn't lift a spade all week. It's a subtle, constant reminder of social hierarchy and your place in it. Despite all this, peasants found ways to cope, sometimes humorously. Mocking the lord behind closed doors, sharing stories of tax collectors' blunders, or trading small gifts and favors among neighbors created micro-lives of joy within the oppressive system. Music, gossip, and occasional drunkenness from weak ale made the burden lighter, at least in spirit. Humor became a survival tool, almost as essential as bread or water. So when you imagine medieval taxation, picture this. You are tired, sweaty, muddy, and starving, yet still expected to deliver portions of your harvest to both human and divine overlords. You work the land, pay your dues, dodge the occasional bailiff, and sometimes fantasize about rebellion, but mostly you endure. You negotiate the system in subtle ways, taking what you can, sharing what you must, and keeping just enough to survive. Taxes weren't just economic, they were psychological. Every grain taken, every corvée demanded, every tithe collected reinforced your dependence, your vulnerability, and your subservience. And yet life went on. Fields were plowed, harvests collected, bread baked, pottage simmered. You survived the lords, the priests, the collectors, and the system, and in doing so, became part of the engine that powered medieval society. In the end, medieval peasants understood the value of endurance. They learned that misery is manageable if approached one day, one task, one grain at a time. The Lord takes his due. The church takes its tenth. The bailiff inspects the fields. And you? You return to your plow, your pottage, your mud, your daily grind, knowing that survival itself is the ultimate victory. You work, you sweat, you pay, you endure, and you repeat over and over, because in medieval Europe, the only constant was the demand for labor and the persistence of human resilience. As the sun climbs higher and the smell of pottage mingles with mud and smoke, your day isn't just about labor and survival, it's about fear. Not the fear of oxen or unpaid taxes, though those are real enough. No, this is a subtler, more insidious fear. The fear of the unseen, the unknown, and the divine. In medieval Europe, superstition wasn't just folklore, it was survival. And the church? Well, the church made sure you never forgot it. A crow lands on your roof. You pause. Bad omen, they say. A black cat crosses the path. Famine, illness, or perhaps just your neighbor's cat on a bad day. Children learn to flinch at shadows. Adults whisper warnings to one another. Witches are everywhere, or at least, someone is accused of being one somewhere, probably for daring to speak a little too freely. If you're unlucky, a rumor spreads. The old woman who cursed the well has been seen at night. You avoid her cottage, mumble prayers, and hope that spiritual displeasure doesn't translate into real-world suffering. The church reinforces this fear with a mix of moral authority and practical control. Tithes, as we discussed, are a tenth of your produce or livestock, taken under threat of eternal damnation. Attend church, or face the consequences. Miss church, or enjoy hell's Wi-Fi. Sermons are entertainment, moral instruction, and psychological control rolled into one. A priest's booming voice can describe the torments of hell in exquisite detail while reminding you that your neighbor is probably just as sinful, and maybe even worse. Public penances are performed for those who disobey, ensuring everyone else remembers their place. Symbols are everywhere. Crosses, holy water, relics, and charms decorate homes and village centers. Even children carry them as safeguards against disease, bad luck, and supernatural mischief. The church tells you they protect your soul, but secretly, they also protect the system, reminding you that divine authority and earthly authority are deeply intertwined. Prayers are required, rituals performed, candles lit, all under the watchful eye of local clergy. Superstition and religion blend seamlessly, creating a world where questioning either could be dangerous. Magic, witchcraft, and folk remedies also coexist with church control. Some peasants mix herbs for healing, sprinkle salt to ward off evil, or perform small rituals before planting or harvesting. These acts are practical, psychological, and sometimes mildly absurd. A charm to keep oxen from dying might involve mumbling over the animal, burying a trinket, or making an offering. Superstition gives peasants a sense of agency in an otherwise uncontrollable life. It's a little comfort, a little hope, a little distraction from relentless labor and looming taxes. The church's influence extends to the calendar as well. Feast days, holy days, and saints' days dictate when you work and when you rest. Some days, you might be forced into prayer and ceremony instead of labor, though the irony is that you usually have to make up the work later. Festivals provide temporary relief from toil, but they also serve to remind you of spiritual hierarchy. Dancing, drinking, and music are sanctioned, but always within the boundaries of morality as defined by clergy. Fear is also practical. Illness, bad weather, and crop failure are all interpreted as divine punishment. Did your child fall ill? Perhaps you or a neighbor sinned. Did a storm ruin the wheat? Surely some moral transgression angered the heavens. Superstition provides explanations for disasters that otherwise make no sense. It's not science, it's survival strategy. If you can identify the cause, perhaps you can appease the powers that be and prevent it from happening again. It may be illogical, but it's comforting. Witch hunts, trials, and accusations, particularly in later medieval centuries, create an atmosphere of paranoia. A single unexplained death, a failed harvest, or a strange illness might be blamed on malevolent neighbors. Fear of social ostracism combines with spiritual dread to maintain control. Even minor disputes are sometimes interpreted through a lens of morality and magic. A quarrel between neighbors could suddenly escalate into a claim of sorcery. You learn to tread carefully, to keep your words measured, to smile even when inwardly frustrated. Church attendance is both mandatory and performative. The Mass is a sensory experience, candles flickering, incense smoke curling through the air, chants echoing, priests adorned in colorful robes. It is awe-inspiring, intimidating, and occasionally entertaining. Sermons often include stories of sinners, devils, and eternal torment, ensuring that the villagers leave feeling sufficiently humble, guilty, and obedient. You sit, you kneel, you listen, and you silently wonder whether this is punishment for your sins or just another example of bureaucracy with divine branding. Sacraments punctuate life from birth to death. Baptism, marriage, confession, last rites. Each is a ritual reminding you that your existence is intertwined with divine oversight. Every stage of life is catalogued, monitored, and sanctioned. Even death is under control. Priests dictate burial rites, ensure tithes are paid, and reinforce social hierarchy in eternal form. You cannot escape the church. It is as pervasive as mud, smoke, and taxes. And yet, superstition and faith also provide solace. A small charm in your pocket might ease anxiety. Lighting a candle in the village church might bring temporary peace. Praying for rain or a good harvest gives you something to do when the weather is uncooperative. Belief, in this context, is both a coping mechanism and a method of survival. It's not all fear, it's strategy. You manipulate unseen forces as best you can while continuing to labor, eat, and endure. Village gossip intertwines with superstition. If a neighbor's cow dies, whispers begin. Perhaps she angered the spirits. If a child recovers from illness, it might be due to saintly intervention or a clever herbal poultice. Knowledge and rumor circulate faster than the plague. You learn to interpret signs, navigate omens, and advise others, or occasionally, scare them with tales of curses and divine wrath. It's practical, social, and, in a twisted way, entertaining. Ultimately, superstitions and church control shape the rhythm of peasant life. They determine when you work, when you rest, what you fear, what you hope for, and how you interpret the world. Fear is a tool, obedience a necessity, and superstition a survival tactic. Your days are punctuated by rituals, prayers, charms, and whispered warnings, all designed to maintain order, faith, and social hierarchy. So, as you imagine standing in a smoky hut or trudging through the fields, remember, every shadow, every crow, every illness, and every failed harvest carries meaning. You scrub, you pray, you observe, you interpret, you endure. You follow rituals, appease the clergy, and heed superstition, all while keeping a wary eye on neighbors, oxen, and lords. The medieval world is one of uncertainty, control, and fear, but also of coping, resilience, and subtle humor. And in that strange balance, peasants thrive. Or at least survive. One charm, one prayer, one cautious action at a time. Life is hard, uncertain, and often terrifying, but the clever peasant knows that superstition and church control are tools, not just burdens. You live, you work, you pray, you repeat, and somehow you persist. By late afternoon, after plowing, cooking, washing, praying, or dodging bailiffs, your life is not entirely solitary. Despite mud, fleas, taxes, and superstition, the village is alive. Not alive like a bustling modern city with coffee shops and Wi-Fi, but alive in the sense of people, neighbors, children, animals, and the occasional traveling merchant, existing in a messy, interdependent ecosystem. This is where community both saves you and drives you slowly insane. The village is your social network, your support system, and your gossip hub. Neighbors are essential. You trade eggs for vegetables, share firewood, borrow tools, and lend hands for harvest. When one family's cow dies, another helps them bury it, or at least complains loudly while secretly enjoying the chaos. Cooperation is survival. Fields are worked together, houses help build houses, and knowledge is passed down orally: how to treat a sick goat, how to fix a leaky roof, or which herbs repel fleas. Mutual aid is the medieval equivalent of a group chat, but with more mud and less privacy. And yet, humans being humans, gossip spreads faster than the plague. One rumor about an unlucky cow, a strange illness, or a hidden stash of grain travels across the village by dusk. People whisper in the alehouse, at the market, or while mending fences. Gossip is both entertainment and social currency. You hear who's quarreling, who's rumored to have stolen, who is secretly wealthy, and who might be consorting with witches. In a world with little to no formal entertainment, gossip is the main event, the Netflix of the Middle Ages. The village market is the center of social life. It's a chaotic, smelly, noisy place where peasants, merchants, and travelers converge. You might trade a few eggs for flour, a chicken for cloth, or simply gather news. Markets are also arenas for comparison. Whose harvest was better, whose family looks healthier, whose livestock is fatter. Envy, admiration, and rivalry flourish here, all under the watchful eyes of neighbors who are probably sharing these observations with everyone else by sundown. Alehouses and taverns are another critical social hub, though modest ones in a small village. Here, gossip becomes more lively, laced with humor, hyperbole, and perhaps a bit of harmless exaggeration. Ale flows, stories grow taller with each retelling, and people momentarily forget the omnipresent mud, the oppressive lords, and the relentless work. You drink, you laugh, you complain about the Lord, the priest, the weather, or your neighbor's obnoxious children. Social bonds form, strengthened by shared hardship and shared humor. Feuds are inevitable. A fence built too far, a cow wandering into someone else's garden, a misdelivered basket of eggs. Suddenly the village has sides. Arguments escalate, insults are traded, and grudges can last years. Yet, despite these tensions, villagers must cooperate. During planting or harvest, disputes are temporarily set aside. Survival demands collaboration, even when personal dislike simmers beneath the surface. You plow together, reap together, repair roofs together. Just don't expect forgiveness to be immediate. Children play games that are often imaginative and occasionally dangerous. They chase, wrestle, or mimic adult labor. Even in play, lessons about social behavior, hierarchy, and cooperation are embedded. Children learn quickly who is trustworthy, who is clever, and who can be pranked without consequences. It's a training ground for future adult life, for the inevitable labor, gossip, superstition, and negotiation of village politics. The church also doubles as a community hub. Festivals, processions, and celebrations bring everyone together. Weddings, christenings, and funerals are communal events. These gatherings offer a rare chance to escape the fields and huts, to exchange news, and to bond. Even in grief, there is social reinforcement. The village rallies around loss, supports one another, and ensures communal survival continues. Humor and storytelling often accompany these events, reminding everyone that life, while hard, has its moments of absurdity and connection. Mutual aid goes beyond labor and festivals. Villagers watch out for each other in emergencies, a fire, a sick child, or a stray wolf threatening the livestock. Networks of support are informal but essential. You know whose house to knock on if a plague case arises or if your roof collapses under snow. Even the gossip, annoying as it can be, strengthens these bonds by keeping everyone aware of what's happening in each household. And then there's the dark humor of community life. When someone falls into the mud, trips over a fence, or has a runaway pig, the laughter is universal. Misfortune is a shared commodity, and while empathy exists, so does entertainment. Life is harsh, dirty, and often unfair, but laughter, the occasional, ironic, slightly cruel laughter, is one of the few pleasures freely available. You laugh, you endure, you work, you gossip, you repeat. So, the village is both a lifeline and a labyrinth. It is your support network, your entertainment, your punishment, and your constant reminder that life is communal, messy, and endlessly complicated. You live in a world where your neighbor can be your savior or your critic, where gossip informs survival, and where shared labor ensures collective survival. Despite mud, fleas, superstition, taxes, and toil, community ties make life bearable. They provide a rhythm, a social structure, and occasional amusement. In the end, medieval peasants are social creatures. They work, gossip, fight, help, celebrate, and endure together. Their survival depends not only on crops, tools, and labor, but on the intricate web of relationships that binds a village. It is a messy, chaotic, frustrating, and vital tapestry of human interaction. And somehow, amidst the mud, the toil, and the absurdities of daily life, the villagers endure, finding in each other the resilience and humor needed to survive another day. By the time dusk settles, you've likely noticed that medieval life comes with a companion more persistent than mud, taxes, or gossip: disease. It's everywhere, lurking in the hovel, the village, and even the seemingly pure air. Fleas, lice, contaminated water, spoiled food, and human proximity create the perfect storm. And while today you might Google your symptoms or call a doctor, in the Middle Ages, your healthcare is mostly luck, prayer, and whatever the village healer happens to have in their bag of herbs, poultices, and superstition. The Black Death is the grimest example, though not the only one. Bubonic plague, typhoid, smallpox, dysentery, pick your poison. Epidemics sweep through villages with terrifying speed. One day, your neighbor is alive, the next, gone. Fear spreads faster than disease itself, aided by rumors, gossip, and the occasional panicked priest. Hygiene, as we discussed, does not help much, but neither does despair. Peasants do what they can: isolate the sick if possible, carry charms, burn herbs, or pray for divine intervention. Sometimes it works, often it does not. Quack cures are everywhere. Your village healer, or doctor, if you prefer the term, might recommend smelling a shoe, burning incense, applying leech therapy, or plastering dung over a sore. It might seem horrifying, but in the medieval mind, it had properties. Perhaps it would draw out infection, or perhaps it simply occupied your attention while your immune system did the real work. You might try boiling herbs for tea, rubbing onion slices on a rash, or drinking concoctions of honey and garlic. Modern medicine would cringe. Medieval peasants just hoped to survive. Some remedies are preventive, some curative, and some purely ceremonial. You might tie a rabbit's foot around your neck, carry rosemary in your pocket, or anoint doorposts with salt and ash. Superstition and healthcare overlap constantly. Wards against evil spirits, charms for good fortune, prayers for healing. These coexist with herbal teas, poultices, and bloodletting. It's a chaotic system, driven by observation, fear, and ritual, with occasional success. Plague is particularly terrifying because of its unpredictability. One family might be wiped out, while the neighbors remain unscathed. Some attribute survival to divine favor, others to proximity to saints' relics. Quarantine is primitive. Sick individuals are isolated as best as possible, sometimes tied up in a spare room, other times exiled from the village. In theory, it helps limit spread. In practice, it mostly prolongs misery. The sight of neighbors growing pale and weak, coughing, or breaking out in sores is a constant reminder that life is precarious. Other maladies are more mundane but equally relentless. Trench foot, a product of wet fields and poor footwear, eats away at toes and feet. Worm infestations, malnutrition-induced weakness, and small injuries that become infected are daily hazards. Even childbirth carries high risk. Mothers and infants face mortal danger, and midwives rely on herbal knowledge and prayer to navigate the process. Survival is never guaranteed, and vigilance is constant. Hospitals in the medieval sense exist, but they are sparse, crowded, and usually religious institutions. Sick travelers or villagers might be admitted, but care is limited. Comfort and sympathy, rather than medicine, are often the primary treatments. Nuns and monks provide food, prayer, and a little human contact. Otherwise, survival largely depends on luck, immunity, and clever home remedies. Disease also affects work and social life. Crops might go untended if the farmer falls ill. Markets slow down when merchants are sick. Families must rearrange labor and responsibilities, relying on neighbors or extended kin. Life continues, but more slowly, more precariously, and with a lot of prayers. Quack cures, charms, and rituals become not just superstition but practical tools to maintain a semblance of control in a world teetering on infection and death. Interestingly, some of the remedies are surprisingly effective. Herbs like garlic, sage, and chamomile have antibacterial or antiseptic properties. Poultices and wound dressings, while primitive, sometimes prevent infection. And despite the absurdity of dung or leech therapy, The combination of hygiene, when possible, herbal remedies, and rest occasionally works in the favor of the patient. Modern medicine would frown, but survival rates in some communities suggest medieval pragmatism wasn't entirely useless. Fear of contagion, combined with superstition, shapes social behavior. Villagers avoid certain individuals or families during outbreaks. They perform cleansing rituals in homes. They carry charms and invoke saints. You learn quickly whom to trust, whom to avoid, and which remedies to try first. Observation, gossip, and communal memory become critical survival tools, alongside physical remedies. And yet, even in this grim scenario, dark humor persists. You might hear jokes about the doctor's cure smelling worse than the disease. You might joke about your neighbor's ridiculous charm or the absurdity of leeches sucking blood while everyone else watches nervously. Humor, as always, is a coping mechanism, sometimes the only relief in a world where disease is omnipresent. So picture yourself in this scene. The hovel is smoky, the fields muddy, and the neighbors uneasy. A cough spreads from one family to another. Herbs boil on the fire, charms hang from the rafters, and a local healer, or maybe the priest, offers advice ranging from practical to absurd. You wash what you can, pray when you must, eat sparingly, and hope the illness passes. You endure, improvise, and repeat. It's grim, it's tedious, but somehow, it's life. In short, disease is a constant, and quack cures, rituals, and folk remedies are both survival strategies and cultural norms. Peasants navigate this treacherous landscape with observation, superstition, ingenuity, and humor. You endure mud, toil, taxes, superstition, and now illness, always adapting, always improvising. Survival is the ultimate skill, and medieval peasants are masters of it, even when the odds are stacked against them, and the cures are sometimes as terrifying as the disease itself. As the relentless grind of medieval life presses on, mud, taxes, toil, superstition, and disease, there are still fleeting moments of relief. Yes, believe it or not, peasants occasionally experience joy. These are rare, shining intervals in a life dominated by exhaustion, filth, and fear. And they usually come in the form of festivals, feasts, music, and communal celebration, when for just a few hours, or days, you can forget the mud, your aching back, and your lord's latest whims. Medieval festivals are carefully timed with the agricultural calendar. Planting and harvest seasons often dictate the rhythm of celebration. May Day, Midsummer, Michaelmas, and All Saints' Day are just a few examples. These events allow peasants to step out of the fields, out of the smoke-filled huts, and into a world temporarily freed from labor and hierarchy. You dance, you sing, you drink, and you eat. You celebrate life, even if the next day it returns to its relentless monotony. The music at these gatherings is simple, repetitive, and infectious. Fiddles, flutes, drums, and voices create a rhythm that even the most tired peasant cannot resist. Everyone joins in, whether they have talent or not. You stomp, clap, and sway, often tripping over straw or mud, but it doesn't matter. The absurdity is part of the fun. You dance like nobody's watching, or like everyone is watching and it's hilarious. The music is communal, egalitarian, and a rare reminder that joy is not reserved for the lordly or wealthy. Food and drink are central to festival life. Ale flows freely, weak by modern standards but potent enough to loosen tongues, inspire laughter, and occasionally prompt questionable dance moves. Meat might appear, often roasted whole, and bread is abundant. Pottage, once watery and routine, becomes richer for the occasion. Sweets, when available, are savored with almost religious intensity. Festivals are a temporary overturning of scarcity and diet monotony, a day when peasants eat well, drink more than usual, and forget the persistent pangs of hunger. Games and competitions add to the chaos and fun. Tug-of-war, sack races, archery contests, and mock battles let villagers showcase strength, skill, and ingenuity. Children watch and imitate, learning both athletic skill and social bonds. Adults compete, sometimes fiercely, sometimes comically. Losers may endure good-natured teasing, while winners bask in temporary glory. Everyone participates, everyone watches, everyone laughs. A brief, egalitarian reprieve from social hierarchy. Storytelling and humor are integral. Villagers recount local legends, ghost stories, and humorous anecdotes. Tales of foolish neighbors, bumbling bailiffs, or improbable luck are performed with exaggeration and theatrical flair. Laughter becomes a form of resistance, a coping mechanism, and a way to bond. Even in the darkest times, illness, famine, and death, humor survives as a communal lifeline. You laugh, you clap, you groan at absurd jokes, and for a moment, life feels lighter. Religious elements often intertwine with secular enjoyment. Processions, plays, and rituals celebrate saints or commemorate events. Church authorities sometimes sanction festivals, understanding that temporary joy maintains social order and reinforces moral lessons. Even here, the dual nature of medieval life is evident. Joy exists, but within a framework that preserves hierarchy and belief. Dancing, drinking, and laughter are permitted, but not without context. Romantic encounters are another delight. Festivals are one of the few socially acceptable venues for flirting, courtship, and, occasionally, secret rendezvous. Music, games, and crowded gatherings create opportunities for young people to connect. You might steal a glance, exchange a token, or dance cheek to cheek with someone you secretly admire. These moments, though fleeting, are remembered, whispered about, and cherished. Romance, like joy, is rare but essential for human endurance. Even animals participate, whether as spectacle or in small comedic roles. Horses, dogs, and sometimes pigs take part in races, parades, or mock battles. Livestock is groomed, decorated, and sometimes paraded through the village, amusing both children and adults. The absurdity of a pig wearing a ribbon or a goat chasing a hat adds levity, a reminder that even in hardship, humor persists. By nightfall, the festival culminates in communal feasting, dancing, and merriment. Fires burn, music persists, and ale flows. Laughter echoes across the village. Temporary forgetfulness replaces the awareness of mud, taxes, and toil. Children sleep exhausted but happy, adults return home lighter in spirit, and even the animals seem momentarily more cheerful. For one evening, or a few days, the village is united in celebration, enjoying the simple pleasures of life. But the morning after brings the inevitable return to reality. Mud, chores, taxes, superstition, and disease resume their unrelenting cycle. Still, the memory of joy lingers. Festivals serve as a mental and emotional reprieve, a reset button, however temporary. Peasants endure because these rare moments exist. They remind them that life, though hard, contains moments worth surviving for. In essence, festivals are the medieval equivalent of Netflix binging, a night out with friends, or a weekend escape, but amplified by community, physicality, and necessity. They provide laughter, music, food, and drink in a world otherwise dominated by labor and hardship. You dance, you eat, you gossip, you flirt, you laugh, and you feel alive. For a few hours, mud becomes manageable, toil seems lighter, and taxes are forgotten. Joy exists, fleeting but vital. So, imagine yourself amidst the throng, singing, dancing, tasting roasted meat, laughing at a neighbor's antics, catching the eye of a secret crush. The world is temporarily brighter, the burdens lighter, and the rhythm of life feels tolerable. Peasants survive mud, toil, taxes, superstition, and disease, but they live for these rare, beautiful intervals of communal joy. Festivals are more than entertainment. They are survival tools, moments of resilience, and reminders that even the most downtrodden humans crave and find happiness. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, festivals and rare joys are the colorful threads amid the gray of mud, taxes, and toil. They remind peasants, and us, that even in harsh, monotonous, and sometimes miserable circumstances, humans seek connection, celebration, and laughter. You eat, you dance, you drink, you laugh, you repeat, and somehow you persist. As the day winds down and the village settles under a darkening sky, it's time to reflect on the strange, messy, resilient world of medieval peasants. Mud, toil, superstition, taxes, hunger, disease, these are the constants of life. Yet, despite it all, peasants endure. Not heroes in the flashy, sword-wielding sense, but survivors, adapters, and sometimes even celebrants of life in the smallest, most fleeting ways. Consider their mornings, waking in huts shared with animals, shivering under straw bedding, and dodging fleas before the rooster even finishes its first crow. By the time they reach the fields, their backs are already protesting. Hands blistered, muscles aching, they face sun, rain, mud, and frost in an endless cycle of planting, plowing, and harvesting. You plow, you sweat, you pray, you repeat. Their labor feeds the village, the lord, the church, and ultimately the empire, but their personal comfort is almost non-existent. Food is sparse and monotonous. Watery pottage, stale bread, the occasional piece of meat, and whatever wild edibles they can forage. Hunger is a constant companion. Yet, in the face of scarcity, peasants develop ingenuity, foraging, brewing, baking, preserving. Cooking is ritual, necessity, and creativity rolled into one. You taste the mystery vegetable stew, you sip weak ale, you wonder how you survived, and somehow you do. Hygiene is a distant fantasy, with rare baths, herbal rinses, lice combs, and eau de manure as their signature fragrance. Taxes and tithes relentlessly consume resources, reminding them that their labor sustains everyone above them, lords, clergy, and those mysterious nobles living in castles with too many rooms. Corvée labor, feudal dues, and occasional rebellions underscore a system designed to extract as much as possible while giving little in return. And yet, peasants navigate it, resist it in small ways, and survive. Superstitions and church control shape both behavior and psychology. Omens, charms, prayers, and rituals regulate work, fear, and hope. The priest's sermons, tales of sinners, and endless rituals guide, intimidate, and entertain. Despite the fear and paranoia, superstition gives structure, a sense of agency, and small comfort amid chaos. Life is unpredictable, but the clever peasant knows how to appease unseen forces while continuing the grind. Community provides another anchor. Gossip, markets, alehouses, and shared labor create bonds essential for survival. Villagers trade, help, laugh, quarrel, and celebrate together. Feuds, pranks, and playful rivalries punctuate laborious days, offering moments of relief. Festivals, feasts, and dancing provide rare but vital joy, reminding everyone that life, though harsh, is worth living. Music, games, and romance light the gray monotony, even if only briefly. You laugh, you dance, you flirt, you eat, you repeat. These ephemeral moments sustain the spirit. Disease and quack cures, ever-present threats, illustrate the precariousness of existence. The Black Death, typhoid, dysentery, and everyday infections sweep through villages, taking the young, the old, and the unlucky. Remedies range from the practical to the absurd. Herbs, poultices, charms, leeches, and yes, sometimes even dung. Survival is as much luck as skill. Observation, experience, community advice, and superstition all play a role. Humor, again, is essential. You laugh at the absurdity of life while hoping your neighbor's strange poultice isn't needed tomorrow. And yet, through mud, toil, hunger, superstition, disease, and taxes, peasants endure. They adapt, resist, and persist. Life is repetitive, grueling, and often grim, but these are humans who survived because of creativity, communal bonds, humor, resilience, and occasional joy. They feed kingdoms while scraping together a few morsels for themselves. They endure plagues, dodgy doctors, and impossible demands. They labor without recognition, without luxury, but always with persistence. If you compare that to modern life, it's almost comical. You survive Zoom meetings, traffic, emails, and grocery lines. Peasants survived famine, filth, frostbite, and lords with swords. They endured mud, lice, superstition, and disease, all while producing the food that sustained entire regions. Perspective is enlightening, if slightly humbling. You complain about your Monday, they endured a month of it, every month, for decades. Yet, somehow, they laughed, sang, and occasionally danced in the mud. Reflecting on resilience, the lesson is clear. Peasants weren't heroes in the traditional sense, but they were indispensable. Without their work, villages would collapse, kingdoms would starve, and history would look very different. Their stories are not of glory, but of persistence. They endured monotony, misery, and the absurdities of life, and in doing so, they shaped the world quietly but profoundly. In the end, you realize that life, at its core, is about endurance, adaptation, and finding moments of joy amid hardship. Medieval peasants offer a vivid example. You plow, you sweat, you pray, you dance, you laugh, you survive, and you pass the knowledge forward. Their legacy is everywhere. In the fields, the villages, the festivals, and the enduring human instinct to persevere. So, as you imagine the smoky huts, the muddy fields, the crowded markets, and the occasional joyous festival, consider this. The peasants survived because they had no choice, and because they found ways to endure, even thrive, in a world that often seemed designed to grind them into the dirt. Mud, toil, superstition, disease, taxes, and occasional feasts, that was their reality. And somehow, they persisted. Next time you grumble about deadlines, bad weather, or minor inconveniences, remember them. Peasants survived mud and fleas, plague and famine, and sometimes even an unreasonable lord, all while keeping life going. They were neither glamorous nor heroic, but they were the backbone of history. And their story is worth remembering, both for the lessons it teaches and for the strange comfort it brings. If they could survive that, perhaps you can survive your Monday. So, like the video, subscribe if you want to hear more tales of relentless work, absurd survival strategies, and occasional moments of joy from history's unsung backbone. Comment where you're watching from, and remember, mud, toil, laughter, and resilience are timeless. You plow, you sweat, you laugh, you survive, and history continues.